Two of the major unions representing workers in the American film and television industry, the WGA representing writers and SAG AFTRA representing actors, are on strike and probably will remain on strike for a while yet because the studios they are striking against are refusing to pay these striking writers and actors what they are asking for, and also refusing to agree not to eventually try to replace them with AI. Well, for the purposes of this video, I want to lay the issue of AI aside and focus on what the striking writers and actors are asking for in terms of dollars and cents. Both unions want increases in guaranteed pay and also increases in residuals that would allow writers and actors to receive a greater share of the revenue generated by works which they, worked on. Works which would not exist without their, work. But all the poor studios, they just can't afford to agree to the unreasonable demands of these unions. Don't these writers and actors realize that the movie and TV industry is in a very fragile state right now? Revenues are down across the board. People don't want to go to movie theaters anymore. Streaming services are bleeding. Our business is evaporating before our eyes. And now you go on strike and ask for more money? What are we supposed to do? A few months ago, when the writer's strike began, the WGA released an estimate of how much it would cost to settle the strike by just agreeing to all of their proposals. The cost, a fraction of a percent of the annual revenue of each company. Now, granted, that's the WGA's own estimate, not an objective third party, but that's also the estimate for giving the WGA every single thing it's asking for. Settling the strike following a good faith negotiation would certainly wind up costing the studios less than the WGA's estimate, since the WGA would surely be willing to budge a bit on its proposals in order to obtain what it considered to be a fair contract for its members. Last week I got to thinking, now that the actors have gone on strike as well, I wonder how much it would cost the major studios to settle both strikes. I looked into it. Unfortunately, I couldn't find an estimate for how much it would cost to agree to all of SAG AFTRA's proposals, but I did find an article reporting on an estimate from Moody's, that venerable financial services company, released on July 17. According to the Moody's analysis written by Neil Begley, settling the WGA and SAG AFTRA strikes could ultimately cost the major studios between $450 million and $600 million a year. Those are some pretty big-sounding numbers. However, it should be noted that the Moody's analysis also takes into account the new collective bargaining agreement between the studios and the DGA, the Directors Guild, which was settled last month without a strike. So that $450 to $600 million isn't all down to those greedy writers and actors. A bunch of it goes to those greedy directors, too. Directors wanting to get fairly compensated for doing their jobs. It turns my goddamn stomach. I thought this was America. It should also be noted that those big-sounding numbers don't sound so big when you compare them to the numbers they would be subtracted from, namely the profits of the major studios. When representatives of the studios claim that revenues are down, they're mostly telling the truth. Revenues have decreased over the last few years, generally speaking, but annual revenues are down is not the same as we're not making money, as you're about to see. I wanted to figure out how much settling these strikes would really hurt the major studios, so I did a bit of research and came up with something. This is just a rough estimate, a sketch, a layperson's attempt to conceive the general idea. I'm not an industry insider. I'm not a professional analyst. I'm certainly not a financial expert. Plus, I was an English major, and math definitely ain't my thing. So if you know more about this than I do, and you detect some serious flaws in my figuring, please offer your corrections or clarifications or what have you in the comments. Now then, even though the WGA's estimate for what meeting its proposals would cost compared the cost of its proposals to the annual revenue of the studios, I thought it would be more fair to compare the estimated cost to the profits of the studios. So I went to a website called Macro Trends that lets you look up the financial data of various companies, and I found the net income of the major Hollywood studios plus Netflix for the year 2022. When most people refer to the major studios, they're talking about the so-called Big Five. Back in the golden age of Hollywood, the Big Five referred to Paramount, MGM, 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, and RKO. Today, the Big Five consists of Paramount, Disney, Sony, Warner Brothers, and NBC Universal. According to Macro Trends, last year, 2022, the Big Five reported the following for their net income. Sony, $7.9 billion. NBC Universal, $5.4 billion. Disney, $3.1 billion. Paramount, $1.1 billion. Warner Brothers, minus $7.4 billion. Obviously, the big outlier there is Warner Brothers, the only one of the Big Five to record a loss, and a massive loss at that. But that loss is due to the merger that created Warner Brothers Discovery. For 2021, Warner Brothers recorded a net income of $1 billion, and for 2020, it recorded a net income of $1.2 billion. That suggests that, under normal circumstances, the company is quite profitable. Plus, in 2022, Warner Brothers Discovery reported total assets of $134 billion, so it's not like they're missing the $7.4 billion all that much. Besides the Big Five, I also got the 2022 net income for Netflix, still the largest video streaming service, and the only major streaming service affected by the strikes not owned by one of the Big Five or another massive corporation. In 2022, the reported net income for Netflix was $4.5 billion. When we add up the net income of the four studios in the Big Five that reported net income, leaving out Warner Brothers, those losers, plus the net income of Netflix, we end up with $22 billion in total income for the Big Five plus Netflix for 2022. Now, let's subtract the Moody's estimate for how much settling the strikes plus the WGA's new contract will cost annually. And just to be fair, let's take the high end of the estimate, $600 million. $22 billion minus $600 million is $21.4 billion. But you know what? Let's make this even more fair to the studios. Let's subtract that $7.4 billion loss from Warner Brothers, because, hey, that's a negative number, right? The other studios in the Big Five reported net income last year, and so did Warner Brothers. It's just that its net income was in red ink instead of black. If we add up the 2022 net incomes of all five major studios, including Warner Brothers, we get $10.1 billion. Add Netflix's $4.5 billion to that, and we get $14.6 billion. $14.6 billion minus $600 million is $14 billion. $600 million is 2.7% of $22 billion. It's 4.1% of $14.6 billion. Either way, the Moody's estimate for settling both ongoing strikes plus paying the already agreed upon new contract for the Directors Guild will cost a tiny fraction of the combined profits of the major studios. And the Moody's analysis isn't limited to just the Big Five and Netflix. That $600 million annual cost would be borne by more than just those six companies. Amazon and Apple are also being struck against, since they own Amazon Prime and Apple TV Plus, two more of the most successful streaming services. Apple's net income for 2022 was $99.8 billion. That's the entire company, not just the streaming service. Apple TV Plus actually loses money. It's never been profitable. But Apple continues to operate it because it considers it a good long-term investment. If Apple by itself paid the Moody's estimated cost of the new SAG AFTRA, WGA, and WGA contracts, that $600 million would represent 0.6% of its net income from last year. That's the kind of money we're talking about here. One company that owns one streaming service could pay the annual cost of settling the strike for the entire industry, and it would amount to a fraction of a percent of its profits. This isn't about money for them. They've got the money. They wouldn't even miss the money. Apple loses twice as much per year on Apple TV as it would cost the entire industry to settle the strikes. Last year, Warner Bros. Discovery lost, as a result of its merger, 12 times the amount it would cost to cover the Moody's estimate to settle the strikes. With the exception of Warner Bros., which reported that $7 billion loss, each of the Big Five and Netflix could afford to pay the entire cost of settling the strikes for the whole industry from their company's profits from last year and still wind up solidly in the black. It's not about the money. It's about control. It's about the bosses of the entertainment industry wanting to keep the talent in their place. We run this show, we call the shots, you do as you're told, and just be grateful to have a job. The same as happens in every other business every time workers say enough is enough and walk off the line and say we're not coming back until you treat us with the respect we have earned. That's scary to a boss. An executive, a CEO, when workers say that. And it should be. Because the value of the industry, the value that those bosses benefit from more than anyone, the value that those bosses have grown rich off of, the workers created that value. And like I said in my previous videos about the strikes, I'm not even arguing that the studio bosses aren't important. It's called show business, and the business side of that is important. But if the show wasn't there, the business wouldn't be there. When's the last time you subscribed to a streaming service to watch David Zaslav? Or bought a movie ticket to see Bob Iger? Bob Iger's been CEO of Disney since 2005, except for a brief period from 2020 to 2022 when he stepped down. Before that, he had been an executive at Disney, and before that at ABC since 1989. In all that time, you know how many movies or TV shows he wrote or directed or starred in? Zero. The movie and TV industry exists because of the creativity of writers and actors and countless other artists, and it is controlled by people who create nothing. And the creators aren't trying to depose those non-creative people. They're just asking for a more equitable share of the wealth that would not exist without them. A share that amounts to a few extra % of the annual profits that are generated by their work. Pennies on the dollar, a pittance in the grand scheme of things. It's nothing. These strikes could be settled tomorrow. The studios could meet every one of the union's demands down to the last decimal place, and they'd never know the difference. But they won't do that. At least not yet, because they're scared of losing even a modicum of that control. And the thing is, they should be scared. Just not of the thing they're scared of. It's not striking writers and actors who are threatening to destroy the TV and movie industry. It's the studio bosses themselves with their greed and cowardice and short-sightedness. If you want to settle the strike, which you say you do, you Igers and Zaslavs, etc., then you should settle it. Give the strikers what they want. Compensate the people who allow you to hoard what they produce and only ask for a tiny slice back in return. Pay them, and just be grateful you have a job.